things of nature, things of that 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 nature.
What's going on, Razorback fans, and welcome to another very special edition of the Pod of That Nature. It's always a special edition. I'm Andrew Ellis, and I'm joined by the tall, white, and handsome Curtis Wilkerson. Game week is upon us. We are a mere 48 hours, give or take, a little bit away from Arkansas starting their season.
Yes, sir.
So we're getting all our last-minute proclamations in. We're getting all our last-minute predictions in, and so we thought, hey, let's take a little bit and let's project some stats. Curtis, do you feel like you are in the right mind frame to completely and 100% accurately project Arkansas stats for the 2024 season?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I hope everybody just goes ahead and bookmarks this episode. That way, when we get to the end of the year, it'll just all be proven right. Hopefully, in some cases, because I'm objective here, man. Like I'm not fluffing. I'm not gassing anything up. So, in some cases, people might think it's a little bit low what I have projected. In other cases, they might think I'm crazy, but it's going to be right regardless. There's no question about that. We're ball knowers over here.
You were a little bit cranky yesterday, a little bit negative. I felt like you were a little, you had a little something going on. So I was hoping I'd get a little bit more of my bright and fuzzy Curtis, today that's going to be pumping that Kool-Aid and telling us how Taylon Green's going to throw 48 touchdowns and all that stuff. But the best thing about what we do, Curtis, and I truly mean the best thing about what we do is we always have people on the internet to hold us accountable and tell us when we're wrong. And so really that's why we're doing this. We just want to give you guys fuel and ammo to tell us that we don't know what we're talking about. And so we're giving it to you right now. So in December, be sure to come back to this exact episode and be like, you idiots. You didn't know anything.
They 100% will.
Oh, and they definitely will. We had a funny moment just before we started recording this. I had, in the past years, I used to write this story back when I was a sophisticated writer. I used to write a story of projecting Arkansas stat leaders. And so I scoured through the internet. I was like, I'm going to go find the story. And I found both of the stories I had written in the last 2 years, only to remember that they're behind a paywall that I no longer have access to. So there you go. We don't have that to reference, but
I remember
we're going to hop right into it either way.
Was it last year or the year before? I guess it was about this time last year when you were moving out of one place to another. And we were in your empty old apartment, but you still had internet, like sitting on the floor while you were putting together the final finishing touches to the projections of the stats. You remember that?
Dude, that was last year, and that's like a memory I forgot I had. I remember doing that. Where like, I don't know why you were over there. We were like moving something. I was like, hold on 1 second, let me finish this real quick. I'd written the first half of it at McDonald's because I had cut my internet off that day. I think I was on a hotspot when we were doing that. But yeah, those are. It was a wild time, but it's a lot has happened since then for Arkansas football. A lot has happened for you and I, and we know more ball now than we did then. We always know more ball than we did the day before. That's our goal, is to know more ball each day, 1%. But let's just hop right into it, Curtis. I feel like we've been talking about Taylon Green a lot lately. This offseason obviously has been a popular topic of discussion. You got a brand new quarterback, and fans get to kind of use their imaginations a little bit because we haven't seen him actually play in an Arkansas uniform outside of the spring game where he was really good. And so I feel like he's a little bit of a polarizing one because of that unknown, where some fans kind of have him projected for, Pi Petrino, you put him in, talented kid, they're projecting a lot of high success. Some people are very skeptical and wondering, hey, is this guy from Boise State going to be able to make it work, even though he kind of maybe lost his job there? Like, what's going on? Curtis, I feel like I've been locked in with you this offseason where we're fairly aligned on Taylon Green, but just overall, just what's your confidence meter at 2 days before the season starts? Where are you at with Taylon Green? You feeling pretty good about him?
I am. I really am. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm probably at like 7.5 out of 10 on the confidence scale. And that's just because you never really know until you know. And I don't think we're going to find out anything in this UAPB game, really. The only thing you could find out is bad, right? It's like you'll learn about Arkansas if they lose or nearly lose to UAPB. You'll learn about Taylon Green if he stinks against UAPB, but not if he's really good. But I think he'll be fine. And yeah, it's a tricky one with him because everything you said is right. You know, it's Boise State to the SEC. Now, Boise State's a really good program, but the competition they face on a week in, week out basis, it's different. And it's going to be more challenging for him in the SEC. There's no doubt about it. He had some struggles there. He lost his job for a while. Accuracy, particularly on intermediate and deep throws, has been questionable for the first few years of his career there. But you bring him to Arkansas, you feel like he's got more resources, better opportunity to develop, probably a better supporting cast or more weapons around him. And then there's the Bobby Petrino factor. So you got to find this weird balance between, well, he's just kind of been average and at times really good versus, hey, the quarterback whisperer got a hold of him. This guy's going to be the next Ryan Mallett. So, yeah, I think that my stat projections are probably going to wind up kind of right in the middle of those things there. And I can go first if you want me to, or you can go whatever, but I've got some thoughts on it for sure.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, if you look at the rankings that people release this time of year of here are the top whatever quarterbacks, top 16 in the SEC, because I guess now there are 16 SEC quarterbacks. Obviously, on last week's show, we talked a little bit about how he ranks among Power 5 quarterbacks. I think you and I are pretty aligned in that we think he has a chance to be around the middle of the pack of the SEC. Like, I think if all goes well, he's in the top 6 or 7 among SEC quarterbacks. If it's not as good, maybe in that 9, 10, 11 range. And so I was kind of looking last year just to see what that would look like. Hey, if you're the 7th best quarterback, what do your numbers look like? I was a little surprised. Folks were not airing it out in the SEC as much as I thought last year, frankly. There were only 5 3,000-yard passers in the SEC last year. I would have guessed more, and I'm guessing obviously injuries played a little bit of a role in that. But yeah, so Jalen Milroe and Joe Milton from Alabama and Tennessee, respectively, they both finished 7th and 8th in the SEC in passing yards, which again, right middle of the pack. And they were right around 2,800 yards, which if my calculator is correct, if Arkansas were to play 13 games this year, that would mean they were going to a bowl game, which I know you do not have them projected to do. That would be about 215 per game, 215 yards per game. And if they didn't play in a bowl game, 12 games, be about 233 per game. And frankly, Curtis, that's about right where I can see Taylor Green for passing yards. Now, if you look back at his past season, like last year, he threw for 1,752 yards in 13 games. So it wasn't really, they didn't throw the ball a ton. I mean, he averaged 8.3 per attempt, but they just didn't throw the ball a ton at Boise State. He threw for just over 2,000 the year before. So he doesn't have a ton of a huge sample size with volume. But in terms of yardage, Curtis, like what do you feel like is a reasonable expectation for Green with the yardage?
Yeah, this is cool because you looked at it from, one standpoint and one angle of it, like comparison wise to other kind of middle of the pack numbers in the SEC. And I looked at it kind of more from a history standpoint. And obviously I looked at his too with, he's averaged about 1,900 yards over the course of 2 seasons there. I understand that we're talking about different systems now, but to me, Kendall Briles, Bobby Petrino, they both like to pile up the numbers. So I kind of look back to good KJ. Now I think Taylor Green's going to be I will almost guarantee that Taylor Green's going to be a better version than last year's KJ Jefferson at Arkansas. But I think back to the couple years prior than that, and KJ was pretty darn solid. I look at 2 years ago when he threw for just over 2,600 yards, KJ Jefferson. And I think to myself, can I really, in year one, new system, new offensive coordinator, new surroundings, can I really justify to myself putting Taylor Green over that? Given his track record, I don't know that I can. Now, he very well may, but I got him in about that 2,600 yard range passing wise, which would be a significant uptick over where he's been in the past against better competition, but a little bit lower than, a KJ Jefferson who had a hell of a year for Arkansas a couple years ago.
Yeah, I think I agree. And shout out to us for not even having that conversation, but we just both came prepared in our own different ways. Yeah, and with the touchdowns as well, a little bit lower than I thought. Like, there was only one quarterback in the SEC, and that was Jaden Daniels, who had more than 25 passing touchdowns. And I also looked at this. There was a lot that were kind of in that, like, 16 to 24 range.
Okay.
I think, Milton and Graham Mertz from Florida, they were right in the middle of the pack at 20. It's 7th and 8th, respectively. Touchdown-wise, I know, yardage is a little bit more tough to project, and there's more variables there. But with touchdowns, do you feel like he's going to get in that KJ range of like low 20s?
I don't know if I'll go quite that far, but again, I'm so glad that you looked at this from the angle you did, of SEC comparisons and kind of where we think he'll land. And I was looking at it more from, okay, what has he done in the past? What have we seen from, Arkansas quarterbacks recently, from the QBs under Bobby Petrino, even in his last stop here? And so I look at it and like Tyler Wilson, 24 touchdowns. Mallett had 32 and 30. Casey Dick, he had 13. He had 14 interceptions in that first year there. I look at that and I think, okay, well, is that a good barometer, a fair barometer for Taylor Green? Well, he's got 25 total touchdowns in 2 years. So it would be hard for me to, all of a sudden say, hey, I think he's going to, throw as many in 1 year in the SEC as he did in 2 years combined in the Mountain West. So I think I'll go a little bit lower than that. He threw 13 touchdowns in his first season at Boise State. He threw 11 last year. I think he's definitely going to do more than that. I like him getting up there in maybe that 18 to 19 range. I think that's pretty good for him. So that's about where I got him, 18, 19.
Just when I look back at his Boise State numbers, it's kind of fascinating where as a, I guess, redshirt freshman, he throws 2,000 yards. I have him here at 14 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and he completed 61% of his passes. And I believe he was the Mountain West Freshman of the Year that year. It's weird where if you take that, if he had just not played last year, I wonder how our projections for him would be, because you kind of look at those numbers as a redshirt freshman. You're like, oh, you can project that out a little bit. He'll probably be a little bit better. But it went the other way, where his completion percentage was down a little bit. His yards per attempt were down a little bit. His touchdowns were down. His interceptions were up. Like, it was just kind of weird that he didn't take that next step last year. And obviously, I wasn't tapped in with Boise State. I'm assuming their whole team was a little bit worse overall. But I wonder if he had just gotten hurt last year and not played, if we would maybe view him in a little bit higher regard.
Probably so. Yeah, that's a really good point. It was almost like the classic sophomore slump for Taylor there. It was just weird. And if you go and look at his individual game logs, it's kind of the same thing where he'll just have these weird games sometimes where he's like 9 of 21 for 108 yards and 2 interceptions. And you're like, wow, that was a struggle bus. And then there will be another game where he's, 19 for 23 for 210 yards and a couple tutties. It's consistently inconsistent, where he's sometimes just very not good at all, but sometimes he's awesome. And I know they've been working on some things with him mechanically, with his throwing motion, and they feel a little bit better about where he's going to be at with all that. But again, you have to balance that with, boy, it's a lot different, challenging DBs in the SEC versus the Mountain West. So I don't know, but I think he's going to see an uptick. I think he's going to have a career high in touchdowns. I won't go as far as to say that he'll get up there in Ryan Mallett or even Tyler Wilson territory, but I think he's going to see an uptick for sure.
Yeah. And, we saw a little bit of that in the spring, frankly, where early on in spring, we were like, wow, this dude is Dyson, like, holy cow. And then there would be moments where you're like, did he complete a pass today? I don't know. And then the spring game happens and people are like, wow, this guy's just been a monster all spring. You're like, well, it hadn't been like that every day, but it is what it is. So it seems like that's just kind of part of his game a little bit, which, a lot of college quarterbacks are like that. But moving on to the rushing a little bit, I mentioned there were only 5 3,000-yard passers. There were also only 5 1,000-yard rushers in the SEC, which, again, just lower than I thought. But, of course, injuries kind of play a role in all this stuff. But I was looking at it, Curtis, because now rushing is going to be way harder because we're splitting this up amongst multiple guys. It's not like Arkansas has one running back that's going to get all the carries, but the guy who finished, I didn't write down the name, but whoever finished number 10 in the SEC in yards per game averaged about 68 yards per contest. Do you feel like that's like a decent bar right there for Jaquindon Jackson, just in his, I guess his only year with the Razorbacks as a senior, if he's really going to be the feature guy we expect him to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might actually even go a little bit higher than that. And one more point real quick that I wanted to make on Taylor Green is what I would really like to see from him is to get in maybe that 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. And so, maybe he doesn't throw for 30 touchdowns, but maybe he also doesn't throw 15 interceptions, so if he's in that 18-9 range or even 20-10 range, and I feel pretty good about where he's at. But to get back to the rushing, I don't know, man. I might be too bullish on Jaquindon Jackson, but I look at it and I understand that they've got, 5 running backs or whatever that they feel good about, and they're trying to find carries for. I really think they have Jaquindon Jackson, and then they're going to need to figure it out with the other 4 guys. I think he's going to wind up being the workhorse for this Arkansas team. So, like, I don't know if he's going to put together the Rocket Sanders year of a couple years ago. But I mean, I could see him having, multiple 100-yard rushing games this season. I could see him pushing 1,000 yards on the year. So, what'd you say, 68 or so? I would probably go higher than that and maybe up over that 75 yards per game mark for Jaquindon Jackson. Really bullish on him. I mean, he's 5.5 yards per carry over the course of his career. And so if he carries that on and he's getting, what I could see being around 18 carries or so per game, I think he could dial it up and have a really good season for Arkansas if he stays healthy, because he was banged up a little bit in camp.
Yeah, and I mean 75 yards per game, that would have him kind of right at that mark of around 1,000 yards per game. And usually when you have 1,000-yard season, it takes usually a few games that you have like 160 or you have a 180 game, or maybe they'll just let him ride against UAPB and be like, let's just get him 250 yards to start the year.
That's what I'm hoping for.
I definitely don't think that's unfair. And really, you mentioned how you think he's going to be kind of the workhorse. I think he's going to be pretty consistent with his production. Like, I don't know if he's going to have these crazy rushing games where he gets 200, because I know Rocket in his year, now he had substantially more than 1,000, but he had some monster games in 2022. I think Jaquindon's going to be just a consistent 80, 90, 100, 80, 80, 70, 80. I think he's going to be pretty consistent with the production. But yeah, I also think that I don't expect Arkansas's other running backs to make it on this list of top 10, 15 of the SEC or whatever. But I think there's also still room, if Arkansas's rushing attack ends up being as good as they hope it is, for Jaquindon to get around that 1,000 mark, but for Rashad Dubinion to get in that 400, 500, 600 mark, which would be, pretty much doubling his career high to this point. We'll see how they use Braylon Russell. Rodney Hill, we hear might be RB2 on Thursday. We'll see how it works out. But and again, it's really true. Like, what we're doing is impossible, trying to project stats, trying to project how the distribution of carries is going to go and how that's going to fare for each guy. Truly impossible. But I'll be interested to see what Rashad Dubinion is able to do, because you look at his numbers through the years, he's only had like 400 yards in his entire Arkansas career. It's like 200 each season, which is lower than I thought, just given how much he's played.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And especially your point there about trying to figure out what the distribution will look like, especially with the understanding that Taylon Green is also going to use his legs quite a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if Taylon Green winds up being Arkansas's second leading rusher, just from the standpoint of getting the consistent carries, because I could see behind Jaquindon Jackson a deal where, well, R-Dub might not be healthy this week against UAPB. And so Rodney Hill gets more carries than he normally would, but then he's good to go for Oklahoma State, and that flips or whatever. And then Taylon Green's kind of consistently getting, 10 rushes or whatever per game. I could see a scenario play out where, Jaquindon Jackson rushes for 900 yards or whatever, and the other running backs behind him kind of combine to equal that. Because it's just going to be weird all over the place. I hope that Dubinion really catches on, and that could become, like a kind of one of those nasty 1-2 punches. I like the way those two guys complement each other. But I don't know. I wonder how healthy Dubinion's going to be, because they were talking about swelling on his knee, which for a running back, you never really like to hear that. And then he hasn't practiced full speed for 10 days. I wonder how much he's impacted by that. And then could he get Wally pipped? Because I know that they like, Rodney Hill a lot. Bobby Petrino and his different flavor that he brings to the table. Braylon Russell, obviously a physical specimen and a freshman that they're excited about. So it's really hard to project where a guy like Dubinion falls, who coming into it, you were thinking, the returner, he's been in the rotation for a couple years. He's a lock to be the number 2 back. And now I'm not so sure. So I don't know, maybe 300 for Dubinion. I might go at, with the understanding that I could be totally wrong based on how healthy he is.
Yeah. Well, and also we are talking about Rashad Dubinion, RB1, according to the depth chart. He and Jaquindon Jackson, they got the or next to their names. Although Sam immediately basically said he was RB4 in the press conference after that. So it's like, who knows?
A wild move.
I could also see Dubinion doing one of those things where he has like 300 rushing yards, but like 350 receiving yards, where it's like,
that's a very good point.
Clearly a huge part of the offense. And so the numbers, there's a lot more to it than just the numbers. Also, I do want to mention Jaquinton Jackson. You got to watch. Taylor Green needs to be watching his back because, as we know, Jaquinton Jackson has the throw power. Curtis, I've been waiting to talk about this. I saw a viral TikTok the other day of someone. They were doing I don't know why Jaquinton Jackson was playing for Ohio State, but they had Jaquinton Jackson playing for Ohio State, a bunch of things, and they did the halfback pass thing, and he just threw like a 65-yard bomb. And I was like, I've been trying to tell people Jaquinton Jackson has 93 throw power, but just we'll see. So maybe next week we'll do a Jaquinton Jackson passing projection whenever Arkansas decides to just run the Wildcat. I should also mention, by the way, that Arkansas's quarterback has led them in rushing in 2 of the last 3 seasons, I believe. He definitely did it in 2021. We don't think that's necessarily going to happen with Taylor Green, but to think that the quarterback won't be involved in the run game would be a little stupid. But on to the receiving, Curtis. Were you aware Andrew Armstrong, top 10 SEC receiver last year, basically?
I didn't look that up, but I believe it. I mean, he was really, really good. And what he have 50, he had like 56 catches, 750 yards in that ballpark last year. He was really good, man. Really good. And I don't know, I'm going to be curious to see what you think about this receiving room, because like a couple years ago, for example, they had Matt Landers and Hazelwood, and they went for 900 and 700. But they were kind of the dudes. And I feel like this receiving room is deeper, and they're also way, way better at tight end, which is something that has to factor in there too. So I don't know if you get 2 dudes that high, but man, it's hard to look at Andrew Armstrong as good as he was last year and not think, he actually will probably do a little bit better than that. So I don't know if he was, I got the stats right there. 56 for 764 last year. I don't know if he's going to go crazy, but 60 for 800. Sure. He's just so reliable. He's always open. I think Taylor Green, especially early on, is going to feel a lot of comfort knowing, man, I can just, when in doubt, throw it to Andrew Armstrong and we're going to be okay there. Health, again, I hate it's an obvious caveat, but we know he's banged up going into the opener. But yeah, Armstrong is he's a bad man. He really is.
Yeah, I think there's a very real path to him being like a much better player, much better receiver, just a more reliable target. I mean, not to say he wasn't reliable, but I just mean like be better across the board. And statistically, it might not show that much. Cause I mean, you said the 765 last year and the 56 receptions, which were 9th in the SEC. I think I see him kind of in that 850, 900 range. There were only 4 SEC receivers that had 1,000 last year. I don't know. I mean, 1,000 yards, you pretty much can't have anything go wrong if you want to have 1,000 receiving yards. And with
they all on LSU's roster,
right? Yeah, or you have to just have an offense that has 6,000 yards of offense like LSU last year. They're on all these lists of they have like 2 or 3 of the top rushers, 2 or 3 of the top receivers. Jaden Daniels is looks like he played a different sport than the other quarterbacks in the SEC. But yeah, I don't see Andrew topping the 1,000 yards for all the reasons you just laid out. That he's going to have to. They're going to spread the wealth a little bit. You have Luke Haz, who's going to account for a good bit. But I do feel like he can be in that little mix there. If we're looking at the other receivers, if you had to bet, Curtis, who would you have as the number 2 for Arkansas in receiving yardage?
Yardage, I'm going to go Broden in yardage. Just because, and this is counterintuitive to what he did last year, because he was getting like 6 yards of reception or whatever it was. It's really strange. But I could see him being kind of in that Matt Landers vein, not as many yards. I don't think he's going to get that. But in terms of he's 6'7", and they're just going to be able to go over the top to him, I think he's going to have some huge ones. But yeah, yardage, maybe I'll go Broden, and I'd probably go a different direction with the receptions.
I think we would go the same direction with the receptions, and that would probably be towards number 6, Isaiah Satania.
Yes, sir.
Well, and also, by the way, if Luke has finished with like 50 receptions or 55 receptions, would not stun me at all, especially with just tight ends. You know how they like to use those guys. And I do think Haz is going to end up in that 500, 600 yard range, which for a tight end, by the way, that puts you in like top 10 in the country for tight ends if you're in that 500, 600 yard range. But with Satania, I want to be careful with how I word this, because I think he's got a chance to be, a dominant deep threat. So I might sound stupid for saying this, but I do think they're going to give Satania a lot of those near the line of scrimmage touches whether it's the tap pass, whether it's just the quick little drag route, the quick little slant, the stop, whatever. I think he's going to have some of those games where he has like 7 receptions for 75 yards type of thing. Whereas I think Broden, to your point, is going to have games where he's like 3 receptions, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. And you're like, oh, okay.
All right.
I kind of think I'm with you on the right track there. Me personally, though, Curtis, I got to be honest. I'm such a Satania guy. I've been waiting for this Satania breakout for so long. I think he's going to end up being like the number 2 guy, like the number 2 option for Arkansas on the offense. I just think there's so much they're going to be able to do with him. But yeah, it's going to be very fascinating to see, because we'll know after a few weeks of like how this is going to work in terms of the distribution and all that. And so, yeah, is it going to be more of a 3-man weave, or is it going to be Armstrong and then maybe everyone else kind of below him? We'll see how it plays out. But yeah, it's going to be funny whenever they just throw a wrench in this whole thing and Monte Harrison has 900 yards receiving.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he'll pull the Jaden Wilson of last year, and it'll be Monte Harrison who just appears and scores a touchdown on the first play of the season at War Memorial. It's I'm with you on Satania, man. I've been waiting for his breakout for what feels like forever now. I think it's finally his time. It's really interesting. I want to point this out. You were talking about Luke Hasz a minute ago, and you said, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he was in that 500 to 600 yard receiving yard range. I just randomly wrote down in my notes kind of an over under for Luke Hasz, and I went 549.5. So like that's literally right there. So we're in sync here.
Well, it's funny. So he played in 5 games last year. And he had 16 receptions, 253 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But really, it took them a few weeks to really get him going. Like his last couple games were some of his most productive. Yeah, in the first 2 games of the season, he had 2 receptions for 19 yards against Western Carolina, 3 receptions, 26 yards against Kent State. But then after that, he goes 4 for 78, 6 for 116 with 2 touchdowns. And then he gets hurt on the first possession against Texas A&M. So if you really were to like do what he was on pace for, what kind of track he was on, you can make an argument that Luke Hasz was on more closer to like a 750, 800 yard range. And that was as a true freshman playing basically 4 games, because he got injured in the first, like, it was like the 3rd play of the game against A&M. So we might actually be underselling him by saying the 500, 600 yards, which says a lot about kind of what kind of player he is. And I really cannot wait to see how he's utilized in this offense. But it's always weird when you switch schemes, you switch offenses and play callers in general, because you just never know. Like, it's never a 1-to-1 thing. So like we have our kind of basis with Armstrong of like, oh, that's statistically what we expect. Hasz, same thing, and then Broden and Satania, I think we kind of just throw their statistics out the window last year. But who knows how this is going to work? I mean, we'll see. Arkansas might just be slinging that rock around, and who knows? But then if we're projecting Talon for like the 2,500 yard range, it gets tough to start saying, oh, this guy's going to have 1,000, this guy's going to have 800, this guy's going to have whatever. But that's what makes it fun, man. We're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. And to your point on Hasz, I think it's been so long since Razorback fans have been able to, see him in game action, that I'm not saying they forgot how good he was, but it hits different when you see it. Because I remember all of camp last year, they brought in Barkeys Gums and, everything. But we were looking at Luke Hasz the whole time going, oh, this dude's really good. But it was at the end of that LSU game last year where I was just like, oh, damn, like this dude is, he's the real deal. And so, healthy in Bobby Petrino's system, I think he's going to be nasty. But I can't wait until, and it'll probably be against UAPB, but maybe at Oklahoma State, the first touchdown reception he gets against those guys, and then everybody all of a sudden it's like that wake up call, jogs the memories from him down in Baton Rouge, and it's just like, oh yeah, this dude is the truth.
Yeah, it's weird. We're in the offseason. I feel like we end up, the guys who are the most known commodities kind of almost getting underrated because we don't talk about them a ton. We don't spend that much time talking about Landon Jackson. We don't spend that much time talking about, Luke Hasz. And so it's kind of one of those things where, like you said, we're going to get into the season like, oh yeah, I forgot that like this guy's like one of the best players in the position at his position in the entire country. And Curtis, one of those guys who we don't talk about a ton because we know he's a known commodity is Mr. Jalen Braxton. That's right. I'm going to the defensive side of the ball just for a quick second here. We don't have to talk too much about the defense because what are we going to do? Sit here and project PFF grades,
Who
projected
cares? We want
tackling
points.
grades.
Yeah.
But did you know, Curtis, Dwight McGlothern and Jalen Braxton were tied for third in the SEC last year? And you ready for this? Passes defensed per game. I couldn't say passes defense because there were some guys that had more because they played in more games, but they each averaged exactly one pass breakup per game, which was third in the SEC. So shout out to Jalen Braxton for doing that. Him and Nudie. Nudie and Walcott also were both top 10 in the SEC with 3 interceptions. I do not remember Al Walcott having 3 interceptions.
I barely remember Al Walcott at all.
Yeah, I was going to say, I will take the SECsports.com's word for it. I do not remember 3 Al Walcott interceptions. I just don't. But it is what it is. Curtis, how many tacklers in the SEC last year do you think broke 100?
That's a really good question. I know Arkansas didn't have one. I'm pretty sure they did every other year under Pittman.
I'll tell you that. He was 5th in the SEC, Jaheim
Oh,
Thomas.
wow. Then, okay, maybe 3?
4 is the yeah. He was the highest non-100 yard or 100 tackle guy. Okay. But weirdly enough, I just like in my brain, and again, tackles are a weird metric where like, a high amount of tackles doesn't necessarily mean good. It just kind of means there and present. But Arkansas went through a stretch where it seemed like every year they had like 2 dudes with 100 tackles. Even dating back to like the mid, the Petrino era with guys like Jerry Franklin, I feel like 100 tackles just kind of seemed almost standard to me. A little bit more rare than I realized just looking at the numbers. But do you see anyone on the Arkansas roster breaking 100 tackles or kind of being in that mix?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably not. I probably wouldn't project that. It's just so tough because when I think about that, I think about linebacker usually as, kind of racking up those tackles. That's probably where you hope it happens, I guess. If you have a ton of tackles in your secondary, that's usually not a good sign of the amount of yards you're giving up from a game-to-game basis. But and with that in mind, I think back and I'm like, well, like Bumper Pool did it, Grant Morgan did it. Did Hayden Henry get 100 tackles that year?
He was definitely around it.
Or he was close. It was crazy, yeah. But there's just not enough proven track record at linebacker for me to say, oh yeah, this dude's gonna get 100 tackles. And that's not to say they won't be good, and allegedly they're deeper than they have been in the past, but I just don't know that I can look at somebody on that defense and go, yep, there's my 100 tackle guy. Now I could see like a Xavier Sori coming over from Georgia and getting, I think he's going to lead Arkansas in tackles. So maybe 80 plus, but I don't know if I can just say, yeah, he's going to get 100. I'd probably stop a little bit shy of that.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you with Sori. I do think Sori is the closest candidate to it. If you're going to have someone on Arkansas that just ends up being in that list, I think he's probably the guy. But what a lot of those guys have in common, Curtis, that you mentioned at Arkansas that had the 100 tackles is nobody behind them was capable of really playing a meaningful role in that team.
Exactly.
And so you had Poole, Henry, Morgan kind of all on the field every single play. They just funneled all the tackles to him. I know Martrell Spate was another one where like he was the only competent linebacker for Arkansas in 2014. So he got all the tackles. Like it's just how it works. So weirdly enough, Curtis, I never thought I'd say this. I think the fact that Arkansas has maybe 3 or 4 guys that they might rotate a little bit at linebacker, maybe move some guys around like Wirth, Switzer, whoever, that might actually cut into some of the tackles that whoever it is that's going to start at linebacker might have. And so Arkansas's depth at linebacker turned out to be the reason why I'm saying they won't get 100 tackles. I never thought I'd say that going into fall camp. It's a
stat killer.
Yeah, just too deep of a room to spread the stats around.
Man, do you agree? Or I guess who do you think is going to be the leading tackler?
I would go Sori. I would go Sori, and I think it's going to be, like you said, in that kind of 80 to 85 range. When we did our video game simulation, I think they had him at like 81. So, like, I think that's about the right range. What is that? 12 times 7 is that 84?
Yes, it is. That's good math, by the way, right off the top there.
Right there.
I was trying to think. I'm going to pull this up real quick. I don't want to kill too much dead air here, but just thinking back to those Saracen, like the player props for the season, and they had some over unders on tackles there, and looking at Sori's, his was set at 74.5. And 7.5 tackles for loss, but Yeah, 74.5. I think that's a pretty good number for him. Brad Spence, another linebacker we expect to start, he was at 44.5. So I think that kind of plays into they feel like there's going to be 3-4 more guys who are going to be in there in the mix as well. So because last year it was Jaheim Thomas, not Jaheim Singletary, had 90 tackles, and Pooh Paul had like 70, 75.
Yeah.
And so it might be a situation where both the 1 and 2 are a little bit lower there.
Well, it was weird at linebacker last year too, because you had like Antonio Greer was like a weird one where he didn't play to start the year, and then he kind of got to a point where he was like starting over both Pooh and Jaheim, and then Jaheim got benched late in the year. Arkansas's linebacker, it was a roller coaster last year.
Strange.
But yeah, that number with Brad Spence, I think we said it in the moment when we were reading that on the show that day, but they need Brad Spence to have more than 44 tackles.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
But it's going to be either one of those things where he either is the no doubt number 2 linebacker who plays a lot and gets way more than 44 tackles, or they just rotate like crazy. He ends up with like 30, and there's just a bunch of guys kind of in that range here. But to sum it all up, don't see any Arkansas Razorbacks getting 100 tackles this year. But, we can always be proven wrong. I also don't see any Razorbacks getting 10 sacks, which may sound like a knock. There were only 3 guys in the SEC last year with 10 sacks. Not a super common thing. I mean, you're damn near 1 a game. I know Drew Sanders was right around that. I don't know if he got to 10, if he was 9.5 or 10.5, somewhere in that range. But 10 sacks is a steep one. I think we both agree Landon Jackson should lead this team in sacks, right?
Yeah, that's what I've got projected, and I think it's easy to look back at his stats from last year and go, okay, Landon Jackson had 6.5 last year. Yeah, he could probably push for 10, and maybe there's some truth to that. But he got over half of those in one game against Alabama, and then he had like 3 sacks in the other 11 games or whatever it was combined. And so you got to have a measure of perspective there. He'll probably have the well spread out a little bit. Now, it could be a situation where he just picks on UAPB's left tackle and UAB's whatever, and he really racks them up in those games, and he doesn't have to go crazy in the SEC. So yeah, like there's a pathway to him getting to 10, but that's a lot. I probably would say 8-ish maybe is where I go for him.
Yeah, I was thinking in that 7.5, 8 range, which by the way, if there's anyone listening that thinks that that's like a low projection, that would have him like pushing on the brink of All-American status. It really would, especially if you just can't, I'm assuming he would be grading out pretty well. He's actually he's really good in run defense, which, when he came to Arkansas, it felt like he was going to be one of those like third down pass rush only guys, but he's pretty well rounded. So I think if he's in that 8 sack range, he's probably on another all SEC team and putting together another good year. Besides Landon, I do think it's going to be very spread out amongst the sacks, because I think it's like, I don't think Nico Davier is just going to be playing 60 snaps over there at defensive end. I think he and Junkaj are going to rotate a good bit. I think Quincy Rhodes is going to get in there here and there without, subbing in for Landon. I don't necessarily think like Eric Gregory is going to rattle off 6 or 7 sacks. So I think you could see one of those things where Landon has 7 or 8, and then it's like 2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, like all those guys. It just kind of spreads out amongst them.
Yeah. I think we're kind of on the same wavelength there. And I wonder, I think back to what Sam was saying about, the aggressiveness with Travis Williams, and, if he's going to let it eat a little bit more this year, if they're going to do some weird stuff, some more safety blitzes, more corner blitzes. And you're right. Just like all of a sudden it's like, 1 here, 2 there, whatever. And then at the end of the year, then they might be pretty high in total sacks. And you're thinking, well, where the hell did they all come from? Well, it was all over the place kind of situation there for sure.
Larry Worth, 5 sacks.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, let's just Larry Worth is going to end up like playing running back by the end of the year, man. That dude just seems to be all over the place. But Curtis, I want to touch on some team numbers here. So we've done the individuals, and so now we're getting into the point where like our brains, we've locked ourselves into some stuff because we projected all the like individuals, and you have to do all the math, which we're not good at, and it kind of has to check out. But I'll start with the points per game. So last year, again, I kind of based this all off of what is middle of the pack in the SEC, and I'm just going to go from there. Weirdly enough, Tennessee was 7th in the SEC in scoring. I always kind of view Tennessee as one of the best offenses in the league. They were 7th in the league in scoring, and there were a lot of teams in their range there. but they averaged 31.77 points per game. Arkansas averaged 26.58, which, by the way, Arkansas averaging 27 points a game last year with that offense feels incorrect almost, but apparently they averaged 27 points a game. So the margin for error really is not, because Arkansas, I think, was 12th in scoring. And so from 7 to 12, it's only 5 points there. So I guess the bar is kind of right around that 30 range. Does 30 feel too high for this Arkansas offense?
I'm going to say no, because had you just asked me that question without context, I would have probably said, I don't know if they're going to score 30 a game. But yeah, now that you mention it, if middle of the pack there was kind of that 31.8 range, the fact that Arkansas scored, who did they score 26.6?
So
I must be jaded by some things. I don't know, but
did they go off against FIU?
I think they had like 44 on them. I know they had 56 or whatever in the opener. So maybe those
Florida, they scored like 39 against Florida.
Yeah, they scored
LSU,
against
weirdly enough. They scored a lot against LSU.
Okay, yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, they just had some clunkers mixed in there for sure.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think I would probably be right in that 30 per game range, because here's the thing though, I think that they're really going to light it up against UAPB and against UAB and against Louisiana Tech. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they scored upwards of 50 in all three of those games, and that's going to help you out. But I also just do not see a world where that average gets drugged down because they only score 3 points at home against Mississippi State. It just feels like a bad day in the Petrino offense, they're going to score 3 touchdowns. Like they're going to score 24 points or so. So maybe that's just me giving too much credit to the man, but I just I have a feeling when it's all said and done that they'll be over 30 points per game.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it, how they're going to beat up on some of the bad offense or bad defenses that they face. But I also think there's going to be some teams in the SEC. Maybe Mississippi State has a bad defense. Maybe Auburn's defense sucks. But LSU. I feel like anytime they face a defense that's going to be shaky, they will take advantage of it. To your point, and so I think over 30 is actually very realistic for this offense. Now on the other side of it, Arkansas last year, their defense, now their scoring defense didn't rank as high as their like per play, per yard defense. They allowed 27.92 points per game last year. So Arkansas on average was getting outscored, which makes sense for a 4-8 team. I think Arkansas is definitely going to be a lot lower than the 28 points per game. And I think that's not indicative of how competent last year's defense was. Middle of the pack in the SEC would have been 22.6 points per game allowed, and that's what Auburn did. Does that feel like an accurate range for you, or do you feel like it's maybe a little too optimistic given some of the offenses they're going to face?
That's kind of where I'm at. It's kind of interesting. I was just looking at that, and the only SEC team to give up more than 30 a game was Vanderbilt, which surprise, surprise. Honestly, I could kind of see Arkansas being in a similar range there for the reasons you mentioned, given something. Oklahoma State, they do have a high-powered offense. Tennessee has a high-powered offense. LSU, they get to see them. Texas, they get to see them. Lane Kiffin's coming to town. So there's a lot of opportunities there for them to give up a lot of points. You also have to consider under Bobby Petrino, like how many quick touchdowns is Arkansas going to get? And then, the ball is going to be in the opponent's hands a little bit more. What'd you say middle of the pack was 22.6?
22.6 was
they were
Auburn.
About 28 last year. I think it's going to get a little better. I'd probably go maybe in that 26-ish per game range.
I was thinking around the 24, 25. Like I think they're not going to quite be whatever. And who knows where that'll rank in the SEC? Maybe 24 per game will be 7th or 8th in the SEC. But I do think they're going to be around that middle of the pack. But I don't think it's going to be as drastic a turnaround. And we touched on this last week, but I think part of it is just kind of the momentum of the game, where like when Arkansas played Bama last year, both of those offenses should have scored more, but it ended up being a really low scoring game. And it just kind of was a little bit of a tight back and forth battle. Obviously the Mississippi State game was the worst example of this. And then we saw the opposite with the Florida game, where it just both teams started scoring a little bit. I think Arkansas is going to find themselves in more of those shootout situations where both teams are just tit for tat back and forth scoring, more so than they are going to be in those defensive struggles. But who knows? I think there's a very real chance that Arkansas gives up 0 points on Thursday. And then who knows what UAB is able to do to them? Who knows what Louisiana Tech's able to do to them? So that's ultimately what's going to end up deciding it. But yeah, I think, we touched on the good offenses. I just don't see like a SEC offense where you're like, oh yeah, it'll be fun to face those guys. We'll beat up on them. We'll shut them down. Because even Mississippi State, you're on the road and it's Jeff Lebby, who always has good offenses, always has good quarterback play. And so it's like, are you really going to like hold them to 4? It's like, I don't know, man. It's just going to be a little bit tougher. Moving on to yardage a little bit. Curtis, would you like to guess which SEC offense was ranked 7th in the SEC? Like the direct middle of the pack, basically.
Man.
I'll give you a hint. There's a connection to the Arkansas Razorbacks here.
A connection to South Carolina.
Closer. You were right on the right track with the OC, but A&M was the number 7 offense in terms of yards per game last year. They were just over 400 at 406.9. And basically, if you look at the numbers, if you average 400 yards per game, you're going to be in the middle of the pack of the SEC. Like that's kind of where those teams lie. Arkansas was not near that. They were at 326.5, which I believe was 12th in the SEC in yardage per game. Curtis, do you feel like they are going to be closer to that 400, or do you think they're going to be closer to that 326?
I think they're going to be closer to the 400 for sure. 320. That's just not a lot of yards, man.
No, man.
It's kind of crazy to think about, but yeah, I mean, even projecting, Taylor Green throwing, let's say 200 yards per game. I feel like that rushing attack is good for $150 at least. So I mean, I think they're going to be. I think I could see them hitting 400 a game, honestly, offensively. Maybe they fall a little bit shy of that in like the 385, 390 range. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to be an improved group. If it's not, that stinks.
Yeah, it would be tough to watch another really bad offense again. Hope we don't have to do that. But also just looking at the averages for rushing and passing, and this is where it gets interesting. And I guess we can make a little bit more definitive proclamations here. So Missouri was the 7th rushing offense in the SEC last year at 172 per game. And really, honestly, Curtis, if we're saying Arkansas is going to get around 400 yards per game, I think they got to be over that. And I think that's in play. I think they're going to be in that 180, 185 range in the rushing. I mean, we've seen years. I mean, there was times under Sam Pittman where Arkansas were top 5 nationally in rushing, having 220, 230. So I don't think it's too out of line here to say Arkansas is going to be a little bit closer to that 200 in rushing. And then for a pass offense, Arkansas averaged 187.5 passing last year. I imagine they'll be a little bit above that. But middle of the pack in the SEC was almost 260 yards. That's what Florida averaged at 7. And so I do think Arkansas, if we're just doing the math here, we're trying not to be too optimistic. I think they're going to be under the passing average. Like they'll maybe be a little bit below average there, but I do think they're going to be above average in the rushing. You agree?
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I agree with that completely. Actually, it's well said.
I did too good of a job.
No, you did a really good job there. That's crazy. That what'd you say? 260 was the average in passing. Yeah, that's nuts, man. I can't project that for Taylor Green. Maybe he does it. I'm not saying he can't, but I can't project that. I do think that it'll be 50 yards or so, maybe lower than that. But yeah, I could see Arkansas having a really good rushing attack. And when you have a quarterback that can use his legs the way Taylor Green has, that your optimism for your overall rushing attack goes up. So yeah, I could see, in that 210, 215 a game in the passing department. And then, 139 yards per game on the ground. That's crazy, man. Like 175 or higher. Yeah. Come on now.
I really do think, Curtis, and I remember Brett Bielema used to say like the magic number. He was like, if you can have 200 passing, 200 rushing, like you're firing on all cylinders. College football changed a little bit, but I do think like 200 passing, 200 rushing. I don't think it's out of the question. We'll see, because I think this offensive line has they're the big question mark here. Thing. We didn't project the stats of the offensive line. Although I always think it's so funny on the video game how they always say like pancake blocks, like that's a thing people track. And they'll like if you have a top offensive lineman in the country, he'll have like 70. It's like just pancaking bros. But no, I mean, they're the kind of the question mark. I do think with this offensive line, they should be a better rushing offense than I think if you have questions, it's probably in the pass protection situation. Yeah. That's at least the word we've been getting from camp is like, hey, they can't block Landon Jackson, and who knows if they're gonna be able to protect in the passing game. But they should get a nice little push up front. And in the spring, Arkansas ran the ball pretty consistently against itself. So I really do think like 200 passing, 200 rushing. I don't know, maybe we're too optimistic, but I think Arkansas is going to average kind of right around that 400 yards per game, which would be about middle of the pack in the SEC. Curtis, do you have any other random stat projections or predictions you want to throw out there? Any random player or anything that you want to just be like, I'm getting it out here now.
I do
5 picks.
Well, I've got 2 things that I want to throw at you.
Okay.
We know that Devin Bell is him, the punter, apparently. Last season, you had Max Fletcher, who was 3rd in the SEC at 46.95 yards per punt. 46.95 yards per punt. If Devin Bell took Max Fletcher's job in the spring, is he going to average over 47 yards per punt?
No, he's not.
I don't think so either.
That number for Max Fletcher, I'm not saying it's like wrong. I'm just saying it's a little deceiving.
It is.
I remember him having some punts that bounced and went like 60. He had some monster punts.
He did.
Like some 59, 64. Like he was rattling off some big ones. I think he even had one that was like 70 or something like that, or like close to it. Like he had some big ones. Obviously Max Fletcher, we know that he would shank one every now and then. I think in the spring, he probably lost his job just because he was coming back down to earth a little bit. Now, Devin Bale, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I remember looking him up. I believe when he was at Northern Colorado, he averaged like 41, 42 yards per punt, which is a respectable number there. I think he's going to be right in between those two numbers. I think he's going to average probably 43, 44, maybe 45 if they how the field position battle works out. But I don't think he's going to be on that level that Max Fletcher apparently was at last year. And he had some awesome games punting. I don't want to act like I'm making light. He had a good season. I just feel like Max Fletcher overachieved last year, frankly. And I feel like Devin Bale will perform well, but maybe not reach that quite high of a ceiling.
Right. Okay. And then I got to ask you about kicker. Like nobody's going to replace Cam Little, but somebody has to try at least.
Someone's going to try. Yeah.
Yeah. Now he was really good last year, obviously 20 of 24. He was 83.3% on his field goal attempts. I remember Scott Fountain was saying that you want to be an 80 guy. Like you want to get in the 80s with that accuracy. Assuming, I guess, that Matthew Shipley is going to be the kicker. Do you think that he goes 2 questions? Do you think that he is 80% accurate? And what do you think that number looks like? Cam Little is 20 of 24 on his field goals last year. And I don't know, man. I just feel like they're probably not going to allow they're not going to allow Shipley to have that many attempts, right? They don't trust him that much, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I definitely think he's going to be lower on the attempts. I don't think he's going to attempt 24 field goals. And frankly, I don't think he's going to be over 80%. I'm basing that off of the confidence meter from this coaching staff and their kickers, not super high. Let's just call it what it is. Like they weren't that good in the spring. The kicking battle was like a concern in the spring. It seems like Shipley has made some strides and he's solidified it a little bit, although there is an or on the depth chart, which nobody really understands. I do think like Shipley, I don't think he's going to be like a bad kicker. He's not going to be a disaster or anything like that. I just think 80%. And I know he was around that at Hawaii. I mean, 14 of 18. I don't have a calculator in front of me, but that's pretty close to 80%. I think maybe 79%. I don't think he's going to end up. I think he's probably going to be. I'm going to try and guess this exactly. Actually, I think he's going to be 13 for 18.
Okay.
So he's going to have exactly what he did last year at Hawaii, but just one less kick, one less 32-yarder to boot through.
I wrote down in my notes 13 of 17 with
which is bumper, bro.
Yeah, which is 76%, so a little bit short of where they want him to be. And I had a long of 51, just because I really don't think that they're going to give him the leeway to really try to boot those, even if he's got the distance. I kind of have a feeling they're not going to trust that as much, but I think there's going to be one of those. Yeah, man, like it's almost halftime. Let's see if we can get 3 points on the board, and he drills one from over 50.
Let me ask you this, Curtis. Will Arkansas miss an extra point? Because I don't believe Cam Little missed an extra point in his entire Arkansas career.
Yeah, I think they will.
I mean, they just have to, right?
Yeah.
It just is what it is.
It's time.
Get a little unsportsmanlike conduct on the touchdown and get it moved back 15 yards. Miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it happening.
Well,
fire Scott Fountain.
Hey, yeah. Well, I mean, this is a big year for Scott Fountain, apparently, man. But I do think I have a lot more confidence out of those two positions. I have a lot more confidence in Bale. I think I'm buying the Bale hype.
Okay. I think I'm with you. I'm with you there.
Yeah. Well, Curtis, I think that just about does it for our stat projection. I feel like we got all the takes we needed to get off our chest. I hope that you fans out there feel like we were fair to your pigs. And I feel like we were. I feel like we were, you know what we were, Curtis? We were true to ourselves. And that's all we can be.
Yeah. We tried our best.
I felt like we did a good job of kind of towing the line of Kool-Aid and realistic expectations, which is always what we try to do here. Guys, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder. Subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, whatever the case may be. If you're watching on YouTube, we obviously appreciate that. We know you like looking at our faces. Make sure you're also tapped in Inside Arkansas Live every day at noon. There's just not a better sports show in America, frankly. Every single day, you just know the consistency is going to be there. And that's what's cool about what we're doing here, Curtis, is this is extracurricular activity. This is not even our daily, this isn't even, John didn't hold a gun to our head and say, hey, you guys better crank this out. We're just waking up on a Tuesday morning and cranking out stat projections.
That's right.
That's the fun of what we've got going on here at Inside Arkansas.
I'm not entirely sure John's even awake.
He is awake because I saw he texted us while we were recording this.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Anyways, but yeah, subscribe to us on this podcast network. Make sure, because it's a separate feed, Pot of That Nature and Inside Arkansas Live, separate feeds, which is also separate from our Locked On feed, which, by the way, we're cranking out daily content there, 2 shows a day on that platform as well. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you got to go. Follow us on all our social medias. We're Inside Arkansas everywhere, and you see our Twitter names here below us. Even though I may be shadow banned on Twitter, you might not be able to find me. Curtis, any final thoughts? Any other shout outs for the fans?
Well, no, I mean, thank you for rocking with us so far. I mean, we're about a month into this. The numbers have been awesome. Bunch of subscribers coming in. The engagement, it's all been really, really cool. So appreciate that. And we're excited for football season too. We got a lot of cool content coming your way, and everybody's pumped for kickoff. And buckle up and take UAPB to cover 49.5, because Arkansas hasn't beat a team by 50 since 2014.
Well, there you go. And also, guys, join us Thursday after the game. We will be going live for a nice little post-game watch party, or I guess not a watch party, because the watch party will have just concluded. The game will be over, but make sure you are subscribed there. Where I think it'll be on this podcast feed here. We'll be putting that up. But we are all you need for football season, man. So we're looking forward to the journey that this Arkansas football team is about to take us on. And we look forward to being there, right there with you guys, the fans, the whole way, to keep you up to date with all the scoops. For Andrew Ellis, what did John always say? For John Neighbors, I'm Curtis Wilkerson. He always said something weird. He's like, for Curtis Wilkerson and Andrew Ellis, what does he say?
That's what he said, yeah.
For Curtis Wilkerson and Andrew Ellis,
yeah,
I'm John Neighbors. And you have a great day, everyone. Inside Arkansas.
Same sports show, same sports channel.
Same sports. There you go. Have a great day, everyone. Woo damn pig.